and welcome to another episode of Coast Connections. As we've mentioned before, the Indigenous peoples in Canada consist of three very distinct groups: the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit. And today we're going to learn some very interesting history about the Inuit people of Canada through the lens that started through the eyes of an 8-year-old girl who is now a professor at the First Nations University of Canada. Please welcome Dr. Norma Dunning.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and for, highlighting Kinauvit.
Absolutely. We have an amazing book that we're going to feature. But I just want to mention that we're coming to our viewers today from the traditional territory of the Inuk First Nation here in Nanaimo, BC, and also the chosen home of the Mid-Island Métis Nation. And where are you today?
I'm in Regina, where I live and work, and it's a beautiful day today.
Yeah, well, we've got your rain, so we don't mind.
Okay.
Dr. Norma Dunning, I did not realize that we actually had a First Nations University of Canada. Tell us a little bit about where this campus is situated and how long you've been teaching there.
Well, for me, I've only been teaching there for the last year. So I started last September, and it's the first time that I'm teaching an entry course, and I've been enjoying it. I teach Indigenous health. But this university, I believe, was first established in the late 1970s. And we work in conjunction with the University of Regina, and I teach mainly University of Regina students.
Thank you. And you, my dear, are a multi-award-winning author, including a very prestigious award from the Governor General of Canada, no less, for an award in literature for your book, Tatiana. Do you want to pronounce that?
No, it's Daina.
Daina. My Inuk tutuk isn't very good tutuk.
That's okay. That's okay. Nobody else's is either. So it's fine.
And Norma, you won that award in 2001. But for COVID and many other reasons, it actually wasn't presented to you until just about 6-7 weeks ago.
That's right. And so due to COVID.
Yes.
So 2021, 2022, and 2023, I believe that's the group. And we were invited into Ottawa in mid-April, and we had a beautiful ceremony, and it was just marvelous to be able to shake the hand of Inuk Mary Simon. So I was very thrilled. It was an honor, a great honor.
One Inuk woman to another. What a special, special occasion. Congratulations to you, Norma.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And I understand you have the award with you. I've never seen one of these or held one of these.
What they do is they take your book and they hire an artist and they leather bound the book. And so what we see here are parts of the original front cover of Daina, which is a print called Caribou Woman. And so it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. It's just absolutely amazing. So nobody's allowed to touch it ever. And
was it signed by Governor General Mary Simon? Is there an inscription in there for you?
No, they don't. Oh man, when they do this beautiful, they do have this beautiful kind of inscription here that we're not going to be able to see very well, but it is in gold. And it's just something that is absolutely amazing. It's such an honor. It is really, truly such an honor.
And the book that we're going to be referencing today, Kinauvit.
Kinauvit.
Thank you. Is shortlisted for the Shaughnessy Cohen Political Pen Award in 2023. Right. So congratulations on that. That's a very prestigious award as well.
Yes, yeah.
And this is all about something I had no idea about, the Eskimo disc system that existed in Canada. So present-day Norma, professor at the university there in Regina, take us back to little 8-year-old Norma and the actual genesis of this book. What was the question you came home and asked your mother about one day when you were 8 years old?
I said, Mom, what are we? I didn't know. And I was at the playground that day, and all the other children, they were talking about, what they were. And then I was asked, what are you? And I said, I don't know. And so then they all laugh at me. and I came home, and my mom, she was peeling potatoes. She was making home fries for Saturday night dinner. And I asked her, like, Mom, what are we? And she spun around very quickly and she said, who wants to know? Mm. And I said, well, I want to know because, all the kids at the playground, they were talking about what they are, and some are Swedish and German, and one kid there, his uncle is a real live pirate. You know how kids talk, and my mom said to me at that point, "You tell them you're French. That's all they need to know." And so, to have that kind of a reaction from her was unusual. And so that whole, that question stayed with me for a very, very long time.
And at the time, 8-year-old Norma was living in Winnipeg, and your family had come from Quebec and also Churchill area as well at some point?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
tell them you're French because you had come from Quebec.
Well, I had been born in Quebec. My parents left Churchill just before I was born. So my 2 older brothers, 2 older sisters, they have, Churchill on their birth certificate. Yeah, and for me, myself and my younger brother, we were both born in Quebec. But my father had rejoined the military, and that was his first posting. So that's how we end up there.
Let's fast forward to 2001, when Norma, you make application to the Nunavut beneficiary card application. Tell us about that and what that revealed in terms of this Eskimo disc system that you had no idea about.
Well, you have to, with that application, I had to be able to provide long form birth certificates. I was born in Quebec, and all I had was a baptismal certificate. So I had to make application into Quebec. And then for each of my 3 sons. And, you're gathering up these documents, and then for me, I faxed. We were not scanning then. We were still faxing. So I faxed documents up to Iqaluit, and I also sent them regular mail. And about 3 months went by, and I hadn't heard anything. So I called, and it was on that phone call when the worker in Iqaluit asked me, what was your mother's disc number? And I said, well, my mom never had a disc. Well, what was your disc number? And I said, well, I never had a disc either. And she said, well, if either one of you had had a disc, this application would be so much simpler. And so that's the beginnings of starting to research into what that system was. I was aware of it, but I didn't know what it meant, what it really entailed. And as time goes along and I'm doing my Master of Arts thesis, that's when I had that luxury of time to be able to really research what that system was, what it did, and how it affected present day Inuit.
Mm-hmm. And this system started in 1939, 1940, and was implemented for at least until the early 1970s here in Canada, where you had to wear this identity tag around your neck to receive any of the services or means of trade that no other Canadian had to do.
That's right. That's right.
And the disc system was introduced as a number because the colonizers, the missionaries, the public servants couldn't pronounce Inuit names. And it was inconvenient for them. So they decided,
that's right.
They decided to number you instead.
Right.
And track you that way.
Right. But, you know, what initiated all of that was an Inuit man from Nunavik having to go into Montreal for medical care in hospital. And so the province of Quebec says to the federal government, we're not paying for this. And the federal government says, well, neither are we. And so they begin this what results is a Supreme Court of Canada case that is titled Eskimo, Are Eskimos Indians? And that case, you can look it up online. And during the course of that case, that's when the federal government had to accept responsibility for Inuit people. So then they sit down and they create these maps, and I was very fortunate to find the maps that I did, and which demonstrated the breaking out of districts in the north, and how they would number the discs based on either being in the eastern Arctic or the western Arctic. And so this whole system takes off based on non-Inuit administrators and missionaries spelling Inuit names differently. And so they were having this overlapping, and the records were not accurate. And that's what initiates this whole, oh, I know, we'll just number them. but the disc was really a form of very heavy surveillance. Yes. because it tracked where you were, what you bought from the store, and at that time coming into the post and trading furs, so they would know how much money you would have received. It tracked location, and children were called out by their number in school rather than their name. And over time, things kind of progress whereby in time, Inuit are being told you cannot use Inuit names anymore. You must use Christian biblical names. And if you look even now, today, if you look into the names that are in around Nunavut and Nunavik, you'll see names like Zebedee and Moses and Adam. So, but in all of that, there is an interruption to the ceremony of birth and the ceremony of death. And as time progresses, then Inuit are told no more drum dancing, no more traditional celebrations. You'll be taken to jail if we catch you doing that kind of stuff.
And during this time too, Norma, the relocations were going on. And I believe it was your own mother or your grandmother was relocated 5 times. Tell us what actually happens during a relocation.
Well, for Padlai, I'm Padlai Inuk. And so Padlai Inuit, we were not coastal. and we lived just above the tree line in like northern Manitoba. That would be our home territory. But what would happen is that a float plane would come in and gather up Inuit, and you are taken onto this plane only with what you are wearing, and that's it. You're flown off into a different area and are told, well, here you are, get by. And for Inuit, there was a Life magazine front cover where they showed they called it Stone Age survivors, and here there's an Inuit mother, father, and baby, and it's very much like a creche scene, and so here I think one of the most highly recognized magazines are portraying Inuit as Stone Age people, and we're talking about well into the 1950s. We're not talking about in the 20s or 30s or anything like that. And so this kind of imagery, I believe it still exists today for Inuit, where, we have to be the people of long ago. We have to be the Inuit beside a seal breathing hole. And it's like we can't progress, we cannot be accepted as modern day people.
And here you are, an Inuk woman with a PhD in Indigenous Studies. You're a professor at a first-class university, and you go, Dr. Norma Dunning. Look at you. Look at you.
Well, thank you.
That's a lot to overcome in just a short period of time. I mean, it was your mother and your grandmother that were treated this way, and the generations back. Tell us a little bit about the traditional Inuit naming ceremony, what that involved, and how that really, bringing in this disc system, really debased that very key part of your culture.
For Inuit, when a child was being born, generally the in-laws, and the parents would be there. The women would tattoo their inner thighs so that when the baby arrived, they saw, this beautiful kind of rendering. And for Inuit, you were named after somebody who had recently deceased. And the names were not gendered. There were not boy names and girl names. So if a very good hunter had passed away and the next child born is a female, she would be given his name and be trained to become a very good hunter. The thinking is that the person who had deceased, who had passed on, their soul would not rest until their name is transferred to the next child. And so it's a wonderful way of keeping a family tree or a lineage, because that name would demonstrate where you were from, who your family is, what your skill was, how you were contributing to that group. And so there's a great deal of history that would come along with that next baby. And that child is trained according to the skills of their predecessor or who they were being named after.
Mm-hmm. How beautiful. That is so gentle, and it just honors the ancestral chain. It's a beautiful, beautiful way to be named. So we replace that with a disc with a number, or called an oyami, I think, in Inuit. In
Oyami.
Yeah.
Oyami.
What happens if you lost the disc?
Well, that is, it becomes very fearsome. There are accounts of different Inuit, and it was generally the moms who would, at some point, usually when I did the research in around age 4 or 5, where a child is being told, memorize this number. You have to know this number. It's not so much why they don't know why, but they know that mom is telling me I have to do this. And so in order, to be able to do any kind of commerce, to be able to go to school, you needed to know that number. And people have to recognize that Inuit also had social insurance numbers. So it's not like you have these two numbers in play. Yeah. But there was a heavy importance placed onto that disc number. Mm-hmm. And as time goes along, the first Inuit gentleman who in Parliament in Ottawa, he stood up and said, I want this number gone. Mm-hmm. Because I am sick of having my mail addressed to my number and not my name. And I know that today there are still Inuit artists who will sign their work with their disc number. And so we have to recognize how recent that history is. Mm-hmm.
Has there, because that was a 30-year window about that happened. Has the federal government ever apologized for this or tried to redress it in any way? Pardon me, you're getting me choked up.
No. No. Yeah. No, not at all. Mm-hmm. There's never been any kind of an apology issued based for the disc system. And the thing about the disc system is, it began in 1941. It supposedly officially ended in 1971. But what the government then starts up is Project Surname, whereby everybody in the North had to have a last name. But what happened is that many families, they would take the name of an uncle or an auntie as a last name, but not all the family would do that. So when those records are sent back into Ottawa, they recognize that there's mom, dad, 3 kids, and everybody's got a different last name. So then the Ottawa initiates Project Correction. So we see the disc system, Project Surname, Project Correction. And it is really into the 1990s before Ottawa has that population sorted out.
So we haven't sorted out the population, and we haven't apologized for this. And it's not something that was ever announced that it was starting, and it was never something that was announced that it was ending. It was just sort of quietly done while the rest of the nation were totally unaware of it, unless you were wearing a disc. Yeah.
That's right.
Did any of the Inuit just toss those discs to the wind? I can't imagine walking around with a disc on me.
There are many living Inuit who still have their discs, who still have that little, and it's about the size of a quarter.
Yeah.
And there are many living Inuit who still have those discs. Mm-hmm. And there was only one grouping that ever said no and tossed it and said, no, we're not doing this. Mm-hmm. But that would have been in the early stages of initiating the system. Mm-hmm. And so there are many living Inuit who still have their discs. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Norma, people hearing this for the first time, what should we do with this information? Is there a call to action? Can we write our MPs? What can we do to redress this? Because this is repugnant, actually, that this happened here in our country.
But, I've spoken about this system across Canada and across the U.S. And one of the very common questions or replies or comments at the end of whatever my presentation is well, nobody died. Nobody died. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that it was a form of assimilation that interrupted cultural practice and that very much dehumanized a population. And Inuit are the only indigenous population globally that ever were numbered in this way. And then I will have First Nations people say, well, I was numbered when I went to residential school. Yes, you were. But when you walked out of that school, that number did not follow you. Where with Inuit, it stayed. It stayed with us. And therein lies, I think, very much the difference in it all. But what can people do? Inform others, number one. When I teach, I always say one of my last questions that my students have to write on is, what will I do with this knowledge? Wow. So it's about telling others. It's encouraging people to this is very, maybe sounds selfish, but they could buy my book and read a very good historic rendering.
On that note, Dr. Norma Dunning, this should be required reading in every classroom starting in grade 4 in this country.
I agree.
It should be. This is a really important piece of Canadian history that we need to shed light on. We just have about a minute left, Norma. Is there any closing thought you'd like to share before we have to wrap up this very intriguing conversation?
Well, I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank everybody who is, listening in when this airs, and I'd like to thank you for giving thought to Inuit in Canada. We're a very small population of just over 70,000, and we're very quiet people. So we're not, we're not the kind of people who are going to kick up a class action lawsuit. We don't operate that way. So, I'd like to thank you, and thank you, honestly, for even reaching out and giving me this little bit of time to get to know you and to get to inform others.
Dr. Norma Dunning, it's been an honor and a pleasure to get to know you through this experience. I so appreciate you and your wonderful, gentle, very powerful spirit. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch. And thank you for joining us, everybody. And I really encourage you to get Dr. Norma Dunning's book, Kinauvit, all about the Eskimo disc system. In this time of reconciliation, I think it's a really important piece of work. And we all learn a little bit more about the Inuit people of Canada and their wonderful culture and traditions. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Coast Connections.